Well, there's a very exciting stage show about to happen and premiering in Melbourne, Australia. It's the story of Dusty Springfield. Vicki Wickham, who was with Dusty Springfield for many, many years, is with us to tell us the Dusty Springfield story. Thank you for joining us here today. It's good to have you.
Nice to be here.
And a fascinating story too with Dusty Springfield, isn't it? Because musically it happened like the start of it right in the early 60s. I guess she was probably into music before that, because it was her father, wasn't it, that actually got her into music originally?
Well, it was her dad, and then she worked actually folk clubs with a guitar, unbelievably, and would play these sort of small sort of society folk clubs. And I didn't do terribly well, but loved doing it. And then, of course, the Springfields with her brother and Mike Hurst was the beginning of the professional career. And then Dusty from that.
Well, let's take it back one step then, because, you know, Dusty Springfield was originally Mary O'Brien. How did she become Dusty Springfield?
I think that she completely rediscovered herself. You know, she was interested in, as I say, she was playing these folk clubs, and she was very much Mary O'Brien in those days. And I think she looked at herself and realised that actually, looking how she was, the presentation, etc., she was never going to be anything more than that. And she literally transformed herself. She would look at French magazines, look at the films of the times, came up with the panda eyes, came up with the styling, came up with the hair, and total transformation. Was it a family transformation as well? Because her brother Dion became Tom Springfield, didn't he? Yeah, he did, but all he changed was his name. I mean, Tom was always reticent about performing, never really liked it, never was quite sure why he was there. Was a great songwriter, understood that side of it, but really hated the performance, hated having to get up, be in places at a certain time, didn't enjoy any of it. So I think that the day that Dusty said, you know, I'm really out of here, I want to do something else, what do you want to do? He said, wonderful, you know, I'll just write, I don't really want to be a performer.
And a fabulously successful writer.
All the Seeker songs.
The Seeker songs,
absolutely.
Yeah, so a nice little Australian connection in there,
There you go.
Mr. Tom Springfield.
Absolutely.
Out of Dusty's singles, you know, you look at the singles, you line them up, and there's just hit after hit after hit, which is, you know, what we're actually going to hear when the musical starts. But the very first one is a track called "I Only Want to Be With You." Right. Which was also the very first hit single for Annie Lennox as well, wasn't it?
With the Taurus, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that, you know, was obviously on Dusty's first album, and it was huge. I mean, it went certainly top 5, for, you know, and then she just followed it with, I think she had more top 10 or top 5 singles than any other artist still to this day, British artist. Yeah.
Well, who was around at the time? There would have been Lulu, there would have been Cilla Black.
Lulu a little bit later. Lulu was a couple of years younger, but Cilla, Sandy, and you were still coming out of the sort of the Kathy Kirbys of the day, and the sort of slightly older, of course Shirley Bassey and the older ones, but the current ones were Cilla, Sandy, and then later Lulu.
Yeah. Were they rivals then?
They were friendly rivals. You couldn't be rivals. England's too small. I imagine it's a bit like Melbourne or somewhere, you know. Everybody knew everybody went to the same clubs, same restaurants. You know, there really wasn't rivalry.
That song that we're talking about, "I Only Want to Be With You," from A Girl Called Dusty was the album, wasn't it? And that was considered an R&B album in its day, wasn't it? Which is very different to what we know as R&B today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you know, everybody was really, they called Dusty, you know, the black negress, blue-eyed soul, and in a way she wasn't. I mean, she just had a sound to her voice. Yes, it was soulful, but it really didn't have much else to do with, you know, black music.
When you turn on the radio today, I mean, you still hear the song "Stay a While," I Just Don't Know What to Do with Myself. You know, these are just like classic hits. Absolutely. You know, even in the 21st century.
No, they are.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Were you too close to all of those songs? Because obviously you were around them every day. No, how do they feel?
I would love to take full credit and say that, but I wasn't. I was just around. I mean, I'd go to the sessions, I'd go to the recordings, just because it was fun. And of course, you know, remember in those days, the whole recording process was so different. We were 4-track at the most. Echo was done in a huge echo plate way down in the basement, and that was the only way you could get any reverb on the vocals. You know, it was so simplistic. The band played live. There was no overdubbing. Nobody went back and said, "Oh, I've missed that note. I can redo it." And Dusty, you know, she was very forward thinking. She listened to like Phil Spector records, American records, and would hear how they were overdubbing, etc. And you know, would really ask the arrangers to write like that, to you know, to be able to do that. And then of course there is the stories which are true of how she would sing in the loo, because the bathroom had tiles and she could get the sound on her voice that she liked and that she wanted.
How quickly could she, or did she, record a song like, you know, I Only Want to Be With You, for instance? Is that something that, you know, you do in half a day?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Very quick. It got slower as she went on, but those days were quick.
Because I remember Paul McCartney a couple of years ago going back into the studio to record his Run Devil Run record, and he said he wanted to do it like the early Beatle records, where they started work at 9 o'clock in the morning and they recorded up until lunchtime, and whatever happened by lunchtime, that was the song, off to lunch, come back, do another one, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, bang, second song done. At the end of the week you had an album.
Absolutely. And of course with Dusty, because she wasn't a band, she was a solo, you had session musicians in, and they were very strict about, you know, playing from 11 to whatever a 3-hour session is, 11 to 2, and at 2 o'clock they truly would put down their instruments and walk out. You know, there was no question of we're going to go for another half hour.
What about, you know, like you look into the audience and there's, you know, the fans out there, but you know, at one point, 1968, I think she was looking out in the audience, and there's the Queen sitting out in the audience. Did she ever talk about that
Princess
experience?
Margaret.
Oh, it was Princess Margaret. Yeah.
But that's still high up on the chain.
Yeah.
Yes, because also it caused controversy, because she, you know, at some point in the show talked about the Queens in the audience and the Queen in the box, and Margaret was not amused. Yes. And she actually had to write a letter saying, I didn't intend it this way. You know? Oh no, Margaret was she was weird. We won't talk about her too much, but I mean, she would hang out at the Revolution, she'd be at clubs, she'd have her lot, but then there was a point where you had to call her Princess, you couldn't say Margaret. You know.
Wow. So that would have been very controversial. That would have been the newspapers then.
Oh yeah, it was, absolutely.
So was that the biggest scandal that Dusty ever had to encounter?
That in South Africa. Those were.
What happened in South Africa?
She went to South Africa, and Vic Billings, who managed her at the time, who was absolutely superb, and they did the deal with the promoters up front, because they were aware of apartheid and what was going on, and said, you know, Dusty will only play to mixed audiences. Absolutely fine. She gets there, and of course, no, that's not the case at all. It's 100% segregated, and she said, I ain't going to do it. I mean, I just am not going to do it. I feel it's wrong. There's no reason why, you know, people shouldn't mix, and if people want to come to my show. And they ended up deporting her. And you know, it wasn't that she was political, it was just a question of right and wrong.
Now between 1963 and 69, I think it was something like 17 UK hits, which is, you know, just
hell of a lot.
That's incredible. You know, talk about one hell of a greatest hits album. But then she left the label, didn't she? She switched labels. She went to Atlantic Records, which is a pretty gutsy move to make for a performer, I guess, when you've had that sort of success. Well,
it was gutsy, except that she had been listening to artists on Atlantic for years, you know, R&B artists, and it was a dream of hers to, you know, to work with Jerry Wexler, Tom Dowd, Arif Mardin, you know. So for her, it was a dream. It also was the entrance to America, and America. She was brought up on sort of MGM musicals, American music, and she really thought this was the beginning of her real career. This is where she was going to make her impact, where she would work, where she would make money, etc., etc., etc. And of course, unfortunately, it didn't happen on every level. Dusty in Memphis, wonderful album, did not sell. I mean, it was a critical hit, but it was not, you know, a commercial hit.
Yet when people talk about the musical works of Dusty Springfield to this day, that is the album they talk about.
Absolutely. It's top 10 in Rolling Stone every time they do their top 500 or whatever. Yes, absolutely. But at the time, no, everybody was so disappointed. It's a bit like Phil Spector and River Deep Mountain High. You know, that was never a hit, only in England, not in America.
Yeah. And was it Son of a Preacher Man that came from that
came
era,
off that.
Yeah.
That came off Dusty and Memphis.
Yes. So that was
a hit. That was a huge hit. Yes. But the album itself wasn't.
Dusty went through a tough time then, didn't she, for quite a period of through the 70s. You know, she was battling depression. You know, was this all about the career not being on track?
Yes, I mean, that's what sparked the whole thing off. She really had set her sights really high. She'd really thought, and there wasn't any reason why it shouldn't have worked. She just chose the wrong team, and they didn't understand it. They put her into like a hotel circuit. She wasn't doing what she should, and she did. She got more and more depressed about it. Money was running out. She wasn't getting the gigs. She wasn't getting the producers she wanted. She always managed to get record deals, but of course the advances weren't what they were because she had, you know, dropped. Also, she was slightly out of fashion by that stage. You know, younger groups were coming in. The 70s was very disco dance. The 80s was new romantics, etc. You know, she didn't really fit, and it was very depressing to her.
So, at which point then did you have to make the decision to become a manager?
I didn't make a decision. It happened because I have a friend called Ali Willis who had written songs for Earth, Wind and Fire and several people, and she called me up one day and said, do you happen to know where Dusty is? Because I've written this song with Neil and Chris of the Pet Shop Boys, and they want Dusty on it. I said, well, send it to me. Yes, I do happen to know where Dusty is. And they sent it, and I thought it was really excellent, and I called Dust and said, I'm Federal Expressing you this record. I think it would, you know. And of course, Dust being Dust said, oh, I don't know, you know, I'm not sure, I don't know who they are, you know. And I, oh, shut the fuck up. You know? You should be doing it. Here's why. It's on the boys, their name's on the label, you're only a guest artist. If it fails miserably, nobody's going to say it's your fault. What a great opportunity. Okay, will you come to London with me? Will you do this? Yes, of course I will, you know, let's go do it. And as it happened and things went, you know, she suddenly said, I suppose you're managing me. Thanks a lot, I suppose I am.
Right.
And that's just kind of how it happened.
Yeah, and that was the Pet Shop Boys, What Have I Done to Deserve This?
Yes.
Which was just one of the biggest dance hits of all time.
Huge,
yeah,
huge. Another one that stands up great today.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That really brought her back then, didn't it? That was a whole new audience.
Without them, I swear to God, she would still be sitting in the desert in LA. You know?
Yeah, and you know, many years later, Neil Tennant spoke at a funeral too, didn't he? Which was very touching.
They were wonderful. I mean, they dealt with all her insecurities. They absolutely were in awe of her. I mean, to them, she was a huge star, a huge diva. They couldn't have been sweeter. When we were trying to get a record deal, they helped us get a deal with EMI. They produced one side of it, of course, in private, came off that too. They were always just part of Dusty's life. They were wonderful.
Because I guess just before that, Pet Shop Boys, yeah, and when I said just before, 5 to 10 years before that, you know, she was dabbling in a whole lot of different styles. It must have been out of her comfort zone. There was Baby Blue in 1979, which was a disco song, wasn't it? Was this her attempting to try and
It was trying to be updating and get her into it, and sort of like when people now, an older artist will try and add a rap star and you just go, ooh, no, that doesn't work. It was a bit like that.
Yeah, but there were a couple of gems that popped up. There was a song which we know here in Australia, Your Love Still Brings Me to My Knees, which was a big hit here for a lady called Marsha Hines. Who,
oh, interesting.
Who
okay, here we go.
Yes.
Right.
Who, by the way, also one of her very first hits was I Just Don't Know What to Do with Myself.
Right,
so she was, you know.
And whose daughter is
Denny Hines and in the Dusty show. So there's a nice little synergy going in there.
That's great, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but that, you know, that song, how successful was that for Dusty as a
It wasn't.
song?
It really wasn't, no. It was never a single, and the album didn't do particularly well either.
Yeah. So when Marsha came across that song,
I'm glad she found it. Yes, excellent.
She found that song, made like a top 10 hit out of it in Australia. Now Dusty had a thing with cats too, didn't she? What was the thing with cats?
She absolutely adored cats. She always had a heap of them. She was big on picking up stray cats, looking after them, putting them into homes, getting them adopted. Just a real do-gooder in the cat world. Didn't particularly like dogs, but cats absolutely. And had this wonderful, it's called a rag doll, called Nicholas, who was honestly treated like better than most human beings. I mean, he had a grand life.
Well, you know, a lot of pets actually do, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But one of the albums was Reputation was dedicated to Malaysia.
Malaysia, right, yes. Who unfortunately got run over, which was sad. Which caused endless dramas, which I understand totally. We used to have more tears about animals than we did about our aunts.
Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
The things you find out.
Right.
Another interesting session she did was with Richard Carpenter, and that was, I believe, the very first time Richard had asked anyone to sing with him since the death of Karen Carpenter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it wasn't a commercial success, but it was a damn good record.
Yeah. So you know, these must be sort of benchmark points in the Dusty story that you know you would remember very well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you recall the Richard Carpenter sessions?
I wasn't there.
Yeah.
No. I mean, that was before me.
We talked about the rivals before, Cilla Black. There was the actual duet that happened between Cilla and Dusty, but very late into the careers of both of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they had been, you know, I won't really say they'd been friends, but they certainly had sort of had dinner together. They knew each other, and of course it was when Bobby was alive. And we had a lot of fun doing that session. I mean, it was for Cilla's album, and Dusty was guesting on it. But actually, Dusty, I think, was surprisingly relaxed and pleased with it. I mean, I think, again, because the pressure wasn't on her, it was on Cilla, she just thoroughly enjoyed it. Giselle and I were talking about that really recently, and Scylla had a good time too, which was nice.
Yeah. So this is all leading up to when I guess Dusty got the tragic story about the breast cancer to start with. How did she take the news? I believe from what I read, she never complained through.
She was extraordinary. I mean, for somebody who could drive you crazy about a cup of tea or a dressing room or something insignificant, she dealt with cancer absolutely wonderfully. There was never a why me, poor me. She researched it. She went on the internet. She talked to doctors. She persuaded the Royal Marsden to bring in drugs that weren't approved in England that she could try. And she just was absolutely phenomenal. And what was so sad was she thought the first time when she went into remission that she'd beaten it, and went ahead and the album that she had recorded in Nashville that Columbia had to hold. She then went ahead and promoted it, and, with full vigor and full force, and really felt that again her life was on an up. And then of course back it comes, and it was dismal. Yeah. But she, again, she handled it with humour. In terms of she was determined to go out a blonde, and so Debbie went to the hospital with her kit. A lot of laughs, along the way. Just really sad.
Yeah, and she did the final performance with Jules Holland.
Absolutely. Yeah. With Sinead O'Connor and Alison Moyer. Yeah. Who was sweet and just joined in on the backgrounds. Yeah. Yeah. Which is. It's a great performance. Wonderful.
It was. Now, just in the latter stages of her life, she was awarded the OBE. And you collected the OBE, didn't you?
I did indeed, by default. Yeah. Only because it's a weird, England's so proper and so sort of, you either have to go to the actual ceremony, or they'll send somebody to you to kind of do the bit, and neither of those she could do. I mean, she was too sick, and so the third alternative was to go and pick it up. So I went round to St James's, and they were all so disappointed that Dusty hadn't come. They'd all got their albums ready for her to sign and everything in iShuffle instead, and took it back to the Marsden to her. And she was so sweet, because she went round every ward in the Marsden, showing people the OB, and was really chuffed about it.
Yeah. So how do you go about collecting an OB? It's not done at Buckingham Palace.
No, I went to St James's, which is right next door. And it's kind of where the people who work for Buckingham Palace work, and they did give me a cup of tea, and they gave it to me in a box, and then that was very funny too, because they gave it me in a box, and I didn't have anything else with me. So one of the girls said, "Oh, I have a bag." So they take out this big. Do you know what Fortnum and Mason's is? It's a very big, grand shop. So they have this huge Fortnum and Mason bag with this little box in the bottom. Yeah, that made her laugh too.
Dusty's funeral was an event in itself too, wasn't it? With the speakers that got up there to talk about, her life. Elvis Costello, for instance, what did Elvis have to say when he got up on stage?
Elvis was also extraordinary. He was such a fan, so supportive. And when I called him and said, would you say something? I mean, yes, I'll be there. And he just said how much she'd influenced him, how, musically, particularly on I Close My Eyes and Count to 10, he still couldn't work out how three hands played the keyboards at the beginning. I mean, he was just wonderful about how innovative she was, how she was somebody that, he just had respected, looked up to, and, there was nobody like her.
And Neil Tennant, he spoke. Yes. Lulu spoke.
Lulu spoke, absolutely.
Yeah, what did Lulu have to say?
Lulu was talking, which was interesting and very much part of Dusty, how Dusty never could remember the lyrics, and she would write the lyrics on her hands. And part of the movements really do come from this, because she had to look at the lyrics as they went past, which was a nice memory. Yeah.
Oh, I hope that's remembered for the stage show.
Yes, I'll tell Stuart. Right?
Yes. Yeah. So the newest chapter in the Dusty Springfield story is the stage show. When did you hear about this?
We were trying to work out the other day, at least 3 years ago, when Dennis and John Michael and David, two of the writers, came to New York, and we all started talking about it. And at the time I thought, this is interesting, I like the guys, but I just thought, it'll never happen, because I've been through this so many times with different shows and for different people and friends and stuff, and it seems to take an awful lot to get a show on. But Dennis was very good and stayed in touch, would email and say, this is happening, this isn't happening, da-da-da. And then suddenly it's like, it's go, So I came over with slight trepidation, because I hadn't really any idea of what they really were going to do. And I didn't want it to be embarrassing. I didn't want it to go into parts of Dusty that, just were private and shouldn't. And I was so thrilled yesterday when they did the presentation, and Stuart, the director, because I think they've covered her life in a really classy. It's right, you know, and the music, of course, drives it. And I think people are going to come out, and I hope go and buy some CDs and discover more.
Yeah. What are the plans for the reissues of CDs?
Well, it's funny you should say. I was thinking on the way here today, I need to call Universal and really make sure that they're onto it and that they're ready, and that some of the box sets come out, because there have been some beautiful box sets which I don't think have come out in Australia.
No.
And yeah, it's on my list of things to do to make sure that they take care of that.
Yeah. Well, let's just finally, we'll just tell the people about yourself, and you're very involved with the music industry, based in New York City.
Yes.
Managing?
Yeah, I still manage Mark Almond, who's doing a new album, who I just think is wonderful and super talented. I'm doing a lot of radio shows for BBC Radio 2 in London. Unbelievably, radio is still, well, it's big here.
Yeah.
It's still big in London, and people do listen, and we do music-based shows, and that's a lot of fun. I'm working with Nona Hendricks on her label. She's got a baby label, and we're just trying to get that up and running. And that's sort of it at the moment.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Mark Ullman's fully recovered from the accident.
Yeah, thank heavens, completely. The only thing that's still got to go is he used to stammer, and then thank heavens he got rid of the stammer, and by being thumped on the head, it's slightly come back, so he's just working on that again. But no, he's 100% well, which is great.
Yeah, when are we going to see that Soft Cell reunion?
I honestly hope not. No, I'm serious, because
Really?
no, I just think Mark's gone beyond that and should go beyond it and has his own career in life.
It was such a big hit, wasn't it? Tainted Love.
Tainted Love, I know. I wish he'd written it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's just one of those songs
It is.
again, talking
No,
about
it's
the Dusty
ingrained in
songs
all
every
of
day
us.
on the radios.
Absolutely,
Yes. Yeah.
right.
Well, Vicki, good to hear the story. Thank you for coming
All
in
right,
to
love. Thank you
join
very
with
much.
us. Thank you for joining us here at Undercover.